Hi folks, welcome back to Stacey Can. Today I am making chicken soup. A side note about chicken soup is you cannot add any rice or noodles or thickeners like cornstarch or flour to it when you are doing any canning, unless it is pie filling and you're using clear gel, which is the modified cornstarch that's specifically designed for thickening when you're making pie fillings. So keep that in mind. That's why I'm not adding, it's just straight chicken soup without the noodle or rice additives. If you were to add those ingredients, the reason why you can is it blocks the heat transfer to get to the center of the jar to properly get the center of the jar heated up enough to kill the microorganisms that you need to kill off to safely preserve your canned goods. So that is why you don't add them. The recipe that I am using today is a combination from the National Center of Home Food Preservation and the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving 400 Delicious and Creative Recipes for today. This will be listed down below. And so I'm using the ingredients from this, but the preserving and processing from the National Center of Home Food Preservation. Reason for that is National Center for Home Food Preservation, when you search their site for soups, it's pretty general. So you really can add in whatever you want. And this is just kind of an option, but I like that this has specific measurements for quantities, which makes my life a little bit easier. But you can really mix and match on, if your family doesn't like carrots, then you can do all celery or throw in another vegetable if you like. You can add or subtract that. You can kind of play with the spices a little bit too. But the processing that the National Center for Home Food Preservation has is a little bit less. They ask you to heat everything up for 5 minutes in a pot, and then fill the jars, and then pressure can for up to 60 minutes once you get up to the recommended PSI for your elevation or altitude. The Ball book is 75 minutes to 90 minutes, for 75 minutes for pints and 90 minutes for quarts, and they want you to bring all of this to a boil for 30 minutes. And it's as the National Center for Home Food Preservation says, the pressure canning cooks it pretty well in the jar and releases all that good flavor together. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing there. I just don't want to overcook it too much, which, I guess you really can't too much with chicken soup, because it all kind of comes out sort of mushy and homey, and that's what you like, but that's what I like anyway. So the ingredients we're using is 16 cups of chicken stock. You can make your own. You could use a vegetable stock if you want. It's really up to you, and I'm using store-bought because that's how I roll. You need 3 cups of diced cooked chicken. You need a cup and a half of celery and a cup and a half of diced carrots, which I've done, and then a cup of onions, plus some salt and pepper for seasoning. And then you can also use 3 chicken bouillon cubes if you want. This is optional. I'm probably going to add 1 because these are actually big. They're extra big ones. You'll notice that I have a little extra of ingredients because I'm doubling this for my family, but this amount that the 16 cups and the 3 cups, etc. This is for 9 pints, or 8 pints, I believe. 8 pints or 4 quarts. So just keep that in mind as far as measurements go. The tools that you need we are doing a 1-inch headspace, so I'm definitely using my green funnel today because it's got the 1-inch headspace. So it's just a little bit easier for measuring for that. I'm definitely bubbling today, so I've got my chopstick for that. And your jar lifter. I'm not using the lid lifter today because I'm not heating the lids. Headspace tool I always still use. And then also ladle. I've got my lids and rings. I've got my jars already heating up in the canner here, so we don't put a hot item into a cold jar. And I also have a little bit of vinegar that I'm going to pour into the canner itself, just kind of keeps it fresh smelling. And then I'll probably use a little vinegar to clean off the rims of the jars. Just does a pretty good job of cutting any of the fats and such that pop up from the chicken. So with all of that, let's go ahead and get started. So this is pretty simple. We're just going to combine all the ingredients. I've got the 3 cups of chicken, of diced chicken. and it's cooked. And then the 1.5 cups of carrots, 1.5 cups of celery. I've got my cup of onions. I am putting in, I'm just going to do one of the bouillon cubes because that's enough for me. And I am adding in, it's basically a teaspoon of salt and about another teaspoon of pepper. And then adding in all of the 16 cups of chicken stock. Got it all poured in and mixed together. I've got the heat up high, and when it comes to a boil, I will set the timer for 5 minutes. The pot has come to a boil, so I've set the timer for 5 minutes. I got my jars heating up in the canner. I'm using my 1-inch Headspace funnel here. National Center of Home Food Preservation strongly suggests that you only fill these, or says to fill the food just halfway full, the hard solid foods, halfway full in the jar, and then add the liquid. The food is not cooked all the way. The veggies aren't cooked all the way, so this gives them room in the jar to expand and absorb the broth, this yummy broth. Got it to about bottom of that. I'm gonna do a quick bubble here. I'm gonna measure. Yep, we're good there. And I'm using a vinegar today to clean the rims really well because I'm using chicken, and chicken's got some fats in it and such, and so it does a good job. The vinegar cuts the fat so the rim is cleaned. And then have our lid. I dropped my lids on the floor, so I had to wash them, and so that's why they're in water. And just remember, the jars are hot. Be careful. Fingertip tight with the ring, and then up and over. Do not tip or tilt, and into the canner it goes. I got the canner is full, and I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on. And I'm going to kick the heat up to high. And once we get, and we're going to start watching for a steady stream of steam coming out of the vent pipe here. And when that happens, then I will set the timer for 10 minutes. Got a steady stream of steam coming out of the vent pipe, so I've set the timer for 10 minutes. Just a side note with this particular recipe, I think the 16 cups of stock is too much. I would reduce it to 12 next time. As you can see, there is a lot of stock, and I have gone through it all. There's some just chicken crumbs in there, but that's about it that's left. So just keep that in mind when you are planning your next planning for this recipe. Check out all that steam coming up. The 10-minute timer has gone off, so I'm going to go ahead and cover the vent pipe. And I'm going to start watching the canner. And once it gets up to 11 pounds of pressure for a dial gauge or 10 pounds of pressure for a weighted gauge, we'll set the timer for 60 minutes for these pints. So I'm up to 11 pounds of pressure, actually 12 pounds, because I just got my dial gauge tested, and I need to be at 12 pounds of pressure, so it's a little over 12 because I can never get it right on 12. So it's either a little over or a little under, and you always want to be over, never under. So it's a little over 12 for me at the moment. It's 10 pounds of pressure on a weighted canner, weighted gauge canner. So I have set the timer for 60 minutes for my elevation or altitude. I always forget which is which, but so that is what I'm doing. But all of the rest of the information as to which altitudes and elevations and what pounds of pressure, PSI for quarts and pints and all that is available down below in the show notes. So I just had a gasket issue. When I was waiting for the canner to get up to the dial gauge to rise up to the PSI I needed it to be at, it wasn't moving. And I was noticing that there was steam shooting out the side, which is never a good sign. It just means the gasket got kicked off or it's not sealing properly. So I was able to contact the food safety hotline and the extension office to double check. After, I had to leave messages, so I had to wait for them to call me back. So in the process of taking the lid off to replace the gasket, I had some of the lids on the jars inside were starting to seal. And that's why I called to say, hey, do I need to replace these or not? And because I had to leave a message, I went ahead and replaced them just in case. And then was able to replace the lid and the gasket and put it back in. And you'll notice this gasket is actually in good shape. It looks like it's in good shape. It is not broken, it's not dried, it's not crusty, anything. It's quite pliable and it's shiny and it still looks like it's in good shape. However, I actually did this twice where I put the lid on and 2 times it shot steam out. So any hoosies, I thought I lost the whole canner, but hopefully I have not, and we shall see. But that is something to consider, is always make sure you have a gasket on hand. In this situation, I didn't need to, according to those 2 resources, I did not need to replace the lids because I was just replacing the gasket and putting it back in and starting it over again. I didn't stop and put them in the refrigerator and go to the store and buy a new one and then have to, you know, dump everything out and reheat everything up and then get it back up to the temperature it needed to be and put new lids on it, etc. I didn't have to do that, thank goodness, because I already had it on hand. So this is a tip. Please, please, please always make sure you have your gasket, a spare gasket for your canners. The 60-minute timer has gone off, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the heat. And we're going to wait for the dial gauge to reach 0. Once it reaches 0, we can go ahead and take off the cover. The dial gauge has gone to 0, so I'm removing the cover, the vent cover. Be careful, it's very hot. And I've set the timer for 10 minutes. We're going to let the jar settle for 10 minutes before taking them out of the canner. The audio on this video did not turn out, so I am doing a voiceover. What you're watching me do here is to take the lid off the canner. Carefully take the jars out of the canner. Do not tip or tilt. And the jars are starting to seal. I'm using bottle openers to carefully lift the center rack out of the canner because in the past I've dropped it on accident and it sealed some of the lids prematurely. So carefully lift the rack out. Look at that gorgeous color. The soup looks amazing. What I'm saying here is thank you for joining me today. The recipes are listed below, one from the National Center of Home Food Preservation and the other from the Ball Canning book. And while you're down there in the show notes, please like and subscribe. That does help. The jars are sealing, which is exciting. And if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, feedback, concerns, please reach out to me. I'm on Facebook at Stacey Can Can. I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Stacey Can Can. My website is www.staceycancan.com. And my email is info@staceycancan.com. Thanks again for joining me today. And until next time, happy canning.